Sarah had spent 7 years trying to become a better version of herself, and it was slowly destroying her. Sarah sat at her desk. The document was open. The cursor blinked. 47 minutes had passed. She had written nothing. Not because she didn't know what to write. Not because she lacked talent. She had talent. Her colleagues knew it. Her manager knew it. Even Sarah, in her most honest moments, knew it. But something inside her, something without a name, refused to begin. So she closed the laptop, opened her phone, scrolled, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet voice said, "You are doing it again. You know Sarah. Maybe you have been Sarah. Maybe you are Sarah right now. Maybe for you it isn't a laptop and a document. Maybe it's the gym bag that never makes it out of the car. Maybe it's the conversation you keep postponing. Maybe it's the dream you've been carrying for 3 years, waiting for the right moment that never comes." We have a word for this. Several, actually. Lazy, undisciplined, weak, broken. But what if we have been using the wrong words entirely? What if what we call laziness is not a flaw? What if it is a message? And what if the messenger, the part of you that keeps pulling you back from the edge of becoming, has been trying, for years, to save your life? To understand what was happening to Sarah, we have to go back. Not to the desk, not to the blinking cursor. We have to go back to the beginning. Sarah grew up in a house where emotion was a kind of weakness. Her father did not cry at funerals. Her mother did not admit when she was afraid. Feelings were things you managed, privately, quietly, behind closed doors. So Sarah learned. She learned to be cheerful when she was exhausted. She learned to say "I'm fine" when she was falling apart. She learned to perform capability so convincingly that eventually, she forgot it was a performance. At school, top of her class. At university, never missed a deadline. At work, the one who stayed late. Who never said no. Who smiled in meetings even when she wanted to scream. By 32, she had everything she was supposed to want. The career, the apartment, the relationship, the life. But every morning she woke up with a weight on her chest she couldn't explain. And every Sunday night, a nameless dread crept in through the silence. She told herself it was stress. She told herself everyone felt this way. She told herself she just needed to push harder. Carl Jung called the version of ourselves that we show the world the persona, from the Latin word for mask. And he believed the mask is not a lie, exactly. It is a survival tool. We all adapt. We all learn which parts of ourselves are welcome and which are not. But the mask has a cost. Because every time you perform happiness you do not feel, something gets pushed into the dark. Every time you say "I'm fine" when you are breaking, something gets pushed into the dark. Every time you swallow your anger because it isn't appropriate, your grief because there is no time, your fear because showing it feels like failure, another piece of yourself disappears into the darkness. And Jung had a name for everything you have locked away. He called it the shadow. Not a monster, not a demon, just the orphan parts of you. The exhausted child who never got to rest. The angry teenager whose feelings were always too much. The dreamer who learned, slowly, that dreaming wasn't safe. These parts do not disappear. They wait. For 17 years, Sarah kept the locked rooms locked. And for 17 years, it worked. Until it didn't. The first sign was small. A deadline missed. Just one. Just barely. Then another. Then the emails she stopped answering. Then the projects she started and couldn't finish. Then the mornings she lay in bed long after the alarm, staring at the ceiling, unable to explain, even to herself, why she could not simply get up. She tried everything. The productivity apps, the morning routines, the journals. She set her alarm for 5 a.m. She made the lists. She punished herself into motion. And every time, every single time, she fell back. And the voice grew louder. You are lazy. You are weak. Something is wrong with you. But here is what that voice never told her. The resistance was not a malfunction. It was a signal. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Sarah had spent 32 years building a life that looked right from the outside. But somewhere deep beneath the performance, beneath the cheerfulness and the capability and the smile in meetings, a part of her had been screaming, I cannot keep living this way. I cannot keep pretending. I cannot keep carrying what was never mine to carry. The shadow does not send polite letters. It does not knock and wait. When it has been ignored long enough, it takes over the controls. You call it procrastination. You call it burnout. You call it falling apart. But what is actually happening beneath those comfortable labels is that the forgotten part of you has finally found a way to be heard by making you stop. The greatest tragedy is not failure. It is self-rejection. Every time Sarah called herself lazy, a part of her heard something else entirely. You are not welcome here. You are too much. You are not enough. And the shadow, hearing this, retreated further into the dark, and the weight on her chest grew heavier, and the cursor kept blinking. The mistake Sarah made, the mistake most of us make, is declaring war on ourselves. She treated her resistance like an enemy to be defeated. She met her shadow with force, and the shadow, as it always does when met with force, fought back harder. This is the paradox that Jung spent his life trying to explain. You cannot destroy a part of yourself. You can suppress it. You can exile it. You can pretend it doesn't exist. But suppression is not resolution. It is just a longer way of losing. Think of it this way. Imagine a room in your house that you have kept locked for years. Behind the door, everything you were told not to feel. Everything you were told was unacceptable. Everything you once were, before the world taught you who to become. Now imagine standing outside that door, screaming at it, demanding it stay shut, pressing your whole body against it to keep whatever is inside from getting out. How much of your life would you spend at that door? How much energy would be left for anything else? This is what self-rejection costs. Not just the suffering of suppression, but the exhaustion of the guard, the constant, invisible, crushing work of keeping yourself from yourself. Sarah did not understand this yet. She only knew that she was tired, more tired than she had ever been, and that the harder she pushed, the worse it became. Until one evening, alone in her apartment, deadline missed, phone dark, too exhausted even to feel guilty. She simply stopped fighting. She sat on the floor, and for the first time in 17 years, she did not try to be fine. She was not fine, and she let herself not be fine. And in that small surrender, something shifted. Weeks later, Sarah sat across from a therapist for the first time. In their first session, the therapist asked her something no one had ever asked before. What are you angry about? Sarah laughed. She wasn't angry about anything. She was fine. She had always been fine. The therapist waited, and Sarah laughed again. And then, to her own surprise, from somewhere she could not locate, she started to cry. Not politely, not quietly, with the force of something that had been stored for a very long time in a very small space. She was angry about all of it, about the years of performing, about the exhaustion that was never allowed a name, about the version of herself that existed only to meet other people's expectations, about the little girl who learned that her feelings were inconvenient, about every Sunday night she had spent dreading a life she had built by someone else's blueprint. That session did not fix her life, but it cracked something open, because the shadow, when it is finally acknowledged, does not need to sabotage anymore. It has been given a voice, and a voice was all it ever wanted. Jung called the work of meeting your shadow individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not optimized, not the person your parents wanted you to be or your culture demanded you become. Whole. The word itself is important. Not fixed, not healed, not better. Whole. Because the shadow was never broken. It was separated. And what the psyche wants, what it has always wanted, is not to be cured of its darkness, but to have its darkness welcomed back into the light. You do not need a therapist to begin this work. Though if you are carrying something heavy, there is no shame in asking for help carrying it. The entry point is simpler than you think. It begins with a single question. Not, why am I so lazy? That question is a weapon. It leads nowhere useful. But, what is this resistance trying to protect me from? Sometimes the answer is small. You are avoiding the email because you are afraid of disappointing someone. You are avoiding the project because some part of you has always known, that it is not truly yours. Sometimes the answer is larger. You have been chasing a version of success that was never yours to begin with. You have been living inside a mask for so long you forgot there was a face beneath it. Sarah did not become a different person after that session. She did not wake up the next morning transformed. She woke up the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. Still afraid, still imperfect, still carrying things she was learning, slowly, to put down. But something had changed in the quality of her relationship with herself. She had stopped treating herself like an enemy. And in that shift, small as it sounds, everything else began to change too. She started small. Not because a productivity book told her to, but because small was all she could honestly offer herself. One morning, she sat at the same desk. The same laptop. The same blinking cursor. The fear was still there. It had not gone anywhere. But this time, she did not fight it. She looked at it the way you look at something you finally understand. And she began to write. Not well. Not confidently. But truly. And that was enough. One paragraph. Not the chapter. One paragraph. One honest conversation. Not the perfect speech. One sentence that was true. One morning where she allowed herself to feel whatever she felt, without performing her way through it. And she discovered something the self-help industry rarely admits. The goal was never discipline. The goal was trust. Trust that you will show up for yourself. Trust that when you fall, you will not abandon yourself. Trust that the person inside the mask, the exhausted, angry, frightened, dreaming person, is worth staying for. Jung believed that the integrated shadow does not disappear. It becomes an ally. The anger, once heard, becomes clarity. The grief, once felt, becomes compassion. The fear, once acknowledged, becomes wisdom. The dreamer, once welcomed back, becomes the reason you get up in the morning. Not the person you perform, the person you actually are. Years later, Sarah sat at her desk again. The document was open. The cursor blinked, and she began to write. Not because she had conquered her resistance. Not because she had finally become disciplined enough, but because she had stopped fighting the part of herself that was afraid, and started listening to it instead. The fear was still there. It would always be there. But it was no longer the enemy. It was the reminder. This matters to you. That is why it is hard. That is why it is worth doing. Jung spent his life arguing that the goal of human existence is not achievement, not productivity, not the relentless improvement of the self. He called the goal individuation, the long, often painful, ultimately sacred process of becoming whole. And he believed, more deeply than almost anything else, that this journey always required going toward the shadow, not defeating it, not performing your way past it, but walking slowly toward the locked room, opening the door, and saying, to the forgotten part of yourself that has been waiting in the dark, I am sorry I left you here. I can hear you now. So the next time you feel the resistance, the next time the cursor blinks and your hand reaches for your phone, before you call yourself lazy, try something different. Get curious. Ask, what is this resistance trying to protect me from? Ask, what part of me is afraid right now? Ask, what have I been carrying that was never mine to carry? The answers will not come immediately, but they will come. And when they do, you may find that what you called your weakness was never weakness at all. It was the part of you that refused to disappear, the part that kept saying, in the only language it knew, I am still here. Please don't leave me behind. The shadow does not want to destroy your life. It wants to save it. And it has been waiting, longer than you know, for you to finally stop running and turn around. The shadow is not the part of you that needs to be defeated. It is the part of you that never stopped waiting to come home.